Mass in Spanish at Immaculate Conception in Douglas, and I was coming back and with all the bugs, on my windshield, so I was cleaning my windshield out here this morning, and I was being very persnickety, as my father would make sure I would be persnickety because he was so persnickety. And so I was cleaning it off, and somebody says, "You missed a spot." That was Kevin over there. He says, "You missed a spot." And I thought, God, okay, geez. Anyway, it's amazing. That's what my dad would say, "You missed a spot." Today's readings help us to maintain our Christian values in a world of much injustice and exploitation of the poor. And that first reading from Amos is really, really, really strong. The prophet Amos, he lived 800 years before Jesus, is known as the prophet of the voiceless. He lived in Israel when things were extremely prosperous, but extremely prosperous for the wealthy. And so he's coming after the wealthy and the leaders of his day. Most of the prophets, the Hebrew prophets, they would be exiled. They could be killed, but most of them were exiled because they spoke the truth to the leaders of the day, and the leaders did not want to hear this. So Amos, though, sees a world of injustice, and he sees a world of the exploitation of the poor. And so the prophet Amos criticized the rich for taking advantage of the poor by cheating and finding ways to increase their own wealth. And so practically every year since Amos throughout history, cheating of the poor has been, at one time or another, quite strong, but it has been a way of life within society. Nothing really much has changed. In spite of social welfare programs to assist the poor, in our own society with food, housing, medical care, the poor continue somehow to be exploited and trampled upon. Why do we have social welfare programs? Some people will say because there's an imbalance of the distribution of wealth within society. And people don't like to hear that. And sadly, there are those among us who are still critical of social welfare programs that we have for the poor, who criticize the poor by saying, well, let them work harder, even though there are many people who have 2 or maybe 3 jobs just to make ends meet. People will say, let them pull themselves up by their own bootstraps. Well, a lot of people don't even have the boots with which to pull themselves up. So 60% of the wealth of billionaires, nothing wrong with being a billionaire, nothing at all. I would love to have a little bit of that, but 60% of the wealth of billionaires is now derived from inheritances and their influence over politicians to protect and expand their wealth while ignoring the needs of the poor through needed social welfare programs. Bishop Helder Câmara, he's now deceased, of the Diocese of Recife, Brazil. He was an outspoken critic of injustice for the church in Brazil, and he was silenced by the political powers of his day. He says, when I give money to the poor, they call me a saint. But when I ask why there are so many poor, or how we can change the political system that exploits the poor, then the politicians and the very wealthy who are in control call me a communist, they call me a socialist. And Etty Hillesum, she was a famous Jewish writer who was killed in Auschwitz. She poignantly wrote about how personal ethics has a hefty influence on our public policy and the potential for cultural change. She said, concern for the poor must respond to both the spiritual and the physical needs of the person to be effective, affirming that each human person has an immortal soul. Each and every one of us. Each and every one of us on this planet has an immortal soul that plays a central role in society's true cultural progress. So this leads us then to the gospel and the parable of the dishonest manager. He is no hero. He knows what's coming down the pike. He does not use what he has been given to forgive the debts of those who owe him. His boss has been dishonest as well. He wants to take care of his job, his behind. He wants to take care of his needs. But he is smart, but he's also very self-centered. And in the end, he's a manipulator who cannot be trusted with his master's wealth and cannot be trusted with what Jesus calls true wealth. The dishonest manager has no real friends in the end. He might think he does. The readings today teach us that true wealth is about the dignity and rights, the common good of everyone. In Catholic social teaching, that no one is ever superior over another person. And it's called God's preferential option for the poor. It's the hallmark of social justice teaching as Catholics. To diminish the human dignity and material well-being of another person can never be tolerated by one who is a follower of Christ. To exploit the poor and not to speak out against the exploitation of the poor is a grave sin, the Church teaches. There's nothing wrong with material wealth. The Church has nothing wrong with that. It has its own wealth. It has lots of wealth. So there is nothing wrong with material wealth, nor with having money. Some have been given more than others, and some have worked very, very hard for what they have. Yes, they have, and we have to respect that. But when a person has earned or inherited whatever it is, must not use it to get more for simply oneself. With the ever-widening gap between the rich and the poor, the rising inequality of wealth because of the mismanagement of wealth in our society, in our times, like the dishonest manager in the gospel, we need to turn away from such corruption, sinful corruption, and be the voice of Amos today in defense of the vulnerable. So maybe we can ask ourselves, who am I oppressing with my words or actions? Just with my words and actions, who am I oppressing? Who is the person that needs a word of respect and compassion? Do I pay attention to the suffering around me? Am I conscious of that? I might not be able to do anything grand, but perhaps I can do something out of the means that I do have, And I know all of you try to do that. And what am I able to do to help someone else stand on their own 2 feet? I think that's what we want others to be able to do. Yes, social welfare programs are important, and some people will always need those. But what can we do to help others, stand on their own 2 feet? So I close with this little prayer by Brian Baker. He says, "The world now is too dangerous and too beautiful for anything but love. I bless your eyes so you are able to see God in everyone. I bless your ears so you can hear the cry of the poor. I bless your lips so you speak nothing but the truth with love. I bless your hands so that everything you give and everything you receive is a sacrament. I bless your feet so you run to those who need you. And may your heart be so opened, so set on fire, that your love, your Christian love, changes everything around you."